Hello, college biology students. We are going to skip ahead to chapter 10, which deals with cell division. And remember, from 10th grade biology, cell division is necessary for the growth of an organism and for also healing injuries in an organism. It's also necessary in reproductive cells. So the first thing I'm just going to mention really briefly is bacteria have a different way of dividing than the cells in your body. And this visual, I think this chart is in your book. I think that's where it comes from actually. And so bacteria reproduce by something called binary fission. So this is cell division in which two identical cells are produced. It's asexual, so that everything that is produced from this original cell is a clone or genetically identical to the parent cell. So first the DNA replicates, DNA moves to opposite sides of the cell. Remember, we don't have a nucleus in bacteria, in those prokaryotic cells, so it's a little bit different. They don't have to replicate the nucleus before division, obviously, because they don't have one. So cell membrane closes in the center, which we kind of see here, and then voila, the cells separate, and that's all. So pretty simple. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. So that was the quick overview. What we are going to talk about is more what happens in our bodies, cell division and reproduction. So there's different types of fertilization. I'm not going to go over, I assume that you know most of this stuff. We've talked about sexual versus asexual reproduction in 10th grade biology. Sexual we say is really that big advantage because you get genetic diversity, so you get genetic differences between the offspring as opposed to asexual reproduction, which really just produces clones. Gametes, just a quick refresher, those cells that, like egg and sperm, they come from something called germline cells, so that's maybe a new term that you haven't heard before. Germline cells become egg or sperm in our bodies. The organs that produce sex cells are called gonads, so that's either ovaries or testes. And in early fetal development, it's the same tissue that either develops into ovaries or testes, triggered by whether you contain the Y chromosome or not. So, but it's the same tissue early on in development that then differentiates into either ovaries or testes. The three types of division, then, we mentioned binary fission. But we're going to talk about both mitosis and meiosis or meiosis. I like to say meiosis. It's technically meiosis. Mitosis, this is the way you remember. I always tell you to remember. Mitosis occurs in mito. So that occurs in body cells. There's no, obviously, male and female, so this produces genetically identical daughter cells. Humans have 46 chromosomes. When we produce, so we have 46 chromosomes in our cells, half of which came from our mom and half of which came from our dad. We also say we'll talk about that later, never mind. In meiosis, so this occurs in sex cells. So obviously things have to happen a little differently in sex cells because remember, if we want all of our cells to end up with 46 chromosomes, then egg and sperm can only have half that many. So the process is a little bit different. It's almost like it goes through two nuclear divisions and produces 4 daughter cells instead of mitosis, which produces 2. Pause this if you need to. I'm going to go fast. I have 15 minutes of time in a video, so I don't want to waste time with things that you could pause and write down. Fertilization is really just the fusion of gametes. That fusion then is called a zygote. The zygote starts out as just a fertilized cell, a fertilized egg, It then begins to divide and make identical copies of itself, but at some point it begins to differentiate and makes up the different tissues that make up our bodies. We obviously, as humans, we have internal fertilization. There are some species that have external fertilization. Usually we think of fish as a really common example of something where the eggs are laid in the water and then the male will come along later and fertilize them after the female has laid them. So there aren't a lot of animals that have external fertilization, honestly. Most of them are internal. Like other egg-laying things like chickens and all birds and all that kind of stuff. Turtles are all internal fertilization. And then homologous chromosomes. Remember that homo means same or of the same. And so homologous chromosomes are two of the same chromosome. Remember that you have 46 chromosomes in your body. You have 2 of chromosome number 1, one which came from your mom and one which came from your dad. 2 of chromosome number 2, one which came from your mom, one which came from your dad, and so on and so forth. All the way through, we say 22 autosomal pairs and then 1 pair of sex chromosomes. If you are female, it is XX. If you are male, it is XY sex chromosomes. And then just a quick refresher, chromosomes, remember, are these X-shaped structures that we find in the nucleus of the cell. This contains all of our genetic information. They're really just tightly coiled DNA held together by a centromere in the center. It's coiled around these proteins called histone proteins. And it's sort of like these neat little packages. I always say, if you are somebody who, let's say you knit or crochet and you have all these different yarns, you don't just wad them up in a heap and throw them in your sewing basket. You wind them up into nice little balls so that they are kept neat and orderly and things don't get wrecked or broken. And so this structure of our DNA wrapping up into these nice little packages really kind of helps to keep it from getting damaged. Of course, different species have different chromosome numbers. Humans have 46, as I mentioned. In sexually reproducing organisms, chromosomes occur in pairs called excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold still. Homologous chromosomes or homologs. That's the same thing. 2 members of a pair of chromosomes. If we look at a cell and it has, like in our body cells, 2 of chromosome number 1, 2 of chromosome number 2, we then say it is a diploid. It is a diploid cell if it has 2 of each type of chromosome. Haploid cells, of course, then have just 1 of each chromosome. So obviously in our bodies, egg and sperm only have 1 of each type of chromosome, so they are haploid. I always remember haploid sounds like half, so they have half the number of chromosomes. And again, just going to breeze quickly through this. This is all review from 10th grade. The sex chromosomes, I already mentioned that. If you haven't written it down, you should. You're expected to know that for sure. In eukaryotic cells, the prior to mitosis, cells have to go through some checkpoints and obviously some growth and replication. So we're going to talk about this, these sort of things that need to happen before actual mitosis. The terms, so a lot of times, let me see if I can find, here we go. This is the cell cycle. So that last slide is just explaining, oh yeah, we represent things. So M phase represents all of the phases of mitosis, which there's only 4. There's a growth phase that has to happen before mitosis. So these pre-phases that have to happen outside of or prior to mitosis, and I guess it is labeled on here, interphase. So this is interphase involves, there's a G1, which is a growth phase. Then it goes into the S phase where DNA is replicated, and then G2 is that DNA coils and condenses, and we prepare for mitosis. There's also a G0 phase, and we're going to talk about why that's actually really important in the cell cycle sometimes as well. There, that doesn't, oh, it's more proportional. So mitosis is technically the division of the nucleus. We tend to just think of it as cell division, but really it's the division of the nucleus, and then of course cytokinesis is the actual cutting of the cell. The cell cycle is just the sequence of events that are followed in order for a cell to reproduce. So it's all of those things. Interphase then is preparation for mitosis. To go into some detail, chromosomes are copied. They unwind to form chromatin. Each chromosome and its copy sister chromosome change to sister chromatids. At the end of this phase, the G1 phase, again, is just everything has to double. The cell has to get bigger. It has to copy all of its organelles. The enzymes that are going to be needed in the cell have to copy. So everything kind of doubles. And cells know when they reach a certain size that, hey, it's time for us to, divide into two here. The S phase, of course, I said DNA is going to copy itself. And that's that is a miraculous process, that it can make an exact copy of itself and correct mistakes that might have happened in it, and copy all 46 of those chromosomes. And then the G2 phase, the cell undergoes rapid growth. It synthesizes some enzymes and structures that it's going to need in that process of mitosis. So like the spindle fibers and things that it needs for that process. And I just really like this visual. It kind of walks through, when we say somatic cell division, we're talking about body cells, not sex cells. So mitosis, of course, only happens in somatic cells. So you can pause this and read through these. I think it's just a really nice, again, really super nice overview of that process. So in prophase, after interphase, my cells got really big and it has two of everything and we're getting ready to divide. Now in prophase, centrioles appear, these little structures. Well, and honestly, they wouldn't necessarily be at the poles of the cell yet. So let's say they make these little tube-like structures. And then also spindle fibers form between those. So there's a couple of different kind of spindle fibers. There's polar fibers, which mean they go from one pole to another. There's kinetochore fibers, which just actually connect onto the centrioles. And these centrioles will begin to move. Of course, we have some chromosomes in the cell. We'd have 46. I am not going to draw 46 of those. In metaphase, or I always remember metaphase middle, the chromosomes are going to line up in the middle. And you can really see the polar fibers I drew in green. They go from one pole to the other pole of the cell. But these kinetochore fibers connect to, so the pink ones connect to those actual chromosomes. And then the last two, and really if we're talking about phases of mitosis itself, so this is the fourth phase we're talking about, but this is really the third, anaphase is the third phase in cell division. We say this pulls those chromosomes away. See the separate sister chromatids dividing. They're going to pull them to opposite poles of the cell. Telophase is 2. It's going to make 2 nuclei. And we begin to see a furrow forming in between them. And then the very final phase is cytokinesis, or cutting of the cell in two, and that is it.